One more time. Poor old Thomas. He gets this bad rap, right? Because we call him Doubting Thomas. And why? Because when Christ appeared to the disciples on Easter Sunday, he wasn't there. And when they told him about it, he didn't want to believe it. But I mean, really, honestly, put yourself in his position for a moment. He leaves them. He goes out Sunday afternoon, and they're all sitting around weeping and mourning and crying their eyes out. Because, of course, Jesus is dead. Jesus is dead and gone. And all of their dreams and all of their hopes have been dashed. And then he comes back just a couple hours later, and they're bouncing around, and they're jumping off the ceiling, and they're crying out, and they're saying he's alive. I mean, how would you react to that? I'll tell you what I would do. First thing I would do, I'd go in the kitchen, and I would check how much wine was gone. Right? I would sniff the air, because that's not sane behavior. And honestly, I think his reaction at that moment to react with some skepticism, with some doubt, is reasonable and logical. I can't blame him for that. I don't think he necessarily got it wrong. But I do think in this story, he did get something wrong. And we can see it in the story. And the question that comes to my mind, the more important question that comes to my mind as I read it today is this. Where was he? Where did he go that Sunday afternoon? And why wasn't he where he was supposed to be? With the church. This is, of course, a story of what happened on Easter Day, what happened on the very day of resurrection. According to John, the events of the day went like this. Early in the morning, Mary went to the tomb, and Jesus appeared to her there. As we read from the eggs this morning, she had that experience of Jesus outside the tomb, and then Jesus left for a while. He wasn't seen. He had explained to Mary that he was ascending to his Father in heaven, but later that same day, that evening, he came to the place where the disciples were, the room where they were staying, where the windows were locked and barred and the doors were locked. And yet despite that, he came and appeared there among them. But I find it kind of interesting that as John tells us this story, he doesn't actually say in so many words that this appearance to the disciples happened on Easter Day, on the day of resurrection. He refers to it instead as that day. And he specifies it by saying the first day of the week. So in other words, he puts the emphasis not on the fact that it was the day of resurrection, but on what day of the week it was. Now, why did he do that? I think he did it because the early church did something really quite extraordinary when you think about it. Because remember, the early church was entirely made up of people who were Jews. People who their entire life, up until that time, had only ever imagined that one day of the week could be holy and different and a day of rest. And that day, of course, was Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath. And yet, despite that tradition, well established in their very beings, these early Christians had done something really quite extraordinary. For they had stopped celebrating Saturday and started celebrating Sunday. And for me, to tell you the truth, for me, that simple fact is the greatest proof that you'll ever find that these Christians experienced something truly extraordinary on a Sunday. For what else could have possibly persuaded them to give up over 1,000 years of tradition just like that? And of course, the extraordinary thing that they experienced on a Sunday was the resurrection of their Lord and friend. But this change was a change that the church made almost immediately. And by the time this gospel was written, this tradition, this new tradition, was firmly established. And that means that John was writing this gospel to people for whom this description of this event that he gives, the disciples meeting on Sunday, they could have only understood that in one way. They would have understood this as a description of the church. And as soon as they understood it as a description of the church, they would have made the assumption, well, if the church was meeting, everyone should have been there. And so the automatic question that would have come to everyone's hearts was, why weren't they all there? Where was Thomas? Shouldn't he have been there with the rest of the church on that Sunday? And I realize, of course, that we wouldn't necessarily quite see things that way. I mean, we look at that and we say, well, you don't always have to be in church on Sunday to be a good Christian. I mean, you can do good in the world. You can pray, you can relate to God, you can do all kinds of wonderful things without always being in church. I mean, some people can't be, we understand that. We're living, like it or not, we're living in a society today that puts demands on people 24/7. But even if it weren't just for that, we do understand that you don't always have to be in church in order to live as a good person, to live in relationship to God. And of course that is true. It is true. And that's why I want to give Thomas the benefit of the doubt. I don't think he was wasting his time on that Sunday. I don't think he was hanging out in the bars or shooting pool. I think he was actually doing good things. As a matter of fact, I suspect that Thomas found the other guys kind of a downer that day. I mean, they were all sitting around, weeping and mourning because Jesus was dead, because all of their dreams that had been bound up in him were dashed. And Thomas had to get out of there. Had to get away from all that negativity, had to go out and do something constructive. So I think he was out there doing what he could to work for the kingdom of God, to do what Jesus would have done had he still been there. He was out there touching the lepers. He was out there healing the sick. He was out there doing what he could to feed the poor. He was out there announcing the good news. Why? Because he figured that that was a better way to honor the memory of this man that he loved than to sit around with long faces talking about the good old days in Galilee. And of course he's right. And honestly, when the church becomes all about sitting around with long faces talking about the good old days, we're in deep trouble. Not that that ever happens here, of course. But he was right. So I think that Jesus was happy enough with what Thomas was doing. He was proud of some of the initiatives that he was taking. But there's just one thing. He kind of missed something, didn't he? He missed something. He missed something by not being there. And he missed something really important, didn't he? Because while he was not there, the other guys had an experience, a really powerful experience of the resurrection of Jesus. And what's more, it was an experience that could not easily be shared by others. I mean, when Thomas came back, they tried to describe it to him. They told him all about it. They said it happened like this. But it was their experience. And try as he might, Thomas simply found that he could not share in something that he had not experienced for himself. And so he said, unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails, and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. It was only the next week, the next Sunday, when it rolled around, and Thomas was actually there. And the experience was repeated for all the disciples again, and he could be part of it. Only then could he see it differently. And Thomas had that experience for himself, and when he did, all he could do in response was fall to his knees and cry out, "My Lord and my God." My friends, this is not just a story about something that happened in one time and in one place. This is a story for us. It has to be. And I'm not trying to suggest, of course, that what they experienced on that Easter Sunday was not real or was not important. Obviously, they did experience something truly powerful on that day. Something so powerful that it not only changed what day of the week they saw as holy, but it changed virtually everything about their lives. It was a world-changing experience. But that doesn't change the fact that it was still their experience, and the problem with experience is this. It is very hard for me to share with someone else what they have not experienced for themselves. The problem with this experience is you kind of have to be there, right? Or you miss it. Well, Thomas, of course, was fortunate because he was there the next week, and the next week it happened again, and he was able to share in that experience. But what do we do? Because it's not a week later, it's almost 2,000 years later. And what does that mean for us? Thomas was able to get in on it, but we can't. At the end of the story, Jesus says to Thomas, "Have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Is that a coded message for us? Is Jesus saying, sorry, you guys are out of luck. It's too late. You've missed it. And you're just going to have to trust in what they experienced. Is that what it means? Not exactly. I don't think so. In fact, I think the church has created for itself kind of a problem over the last couple thousand years. Because what we've done in the church is we have put limits on the experience of the power of the resurrection. We put limits on the experience of the power of God. And we've tried to say that those experiences can only happen at certain times and in certain places. And if you're not there, you missed it. And so basically what the church has said to the world is, if you weren't around in that little short period of time, shortly after Jesus rose from the dead, sorry, you don't get to experience it for yourself. You're going to have to just trust in what they experienced. But I don't agree with that. I think that's wrong. Because I believe that the power of God, the power that raised Jesus Christ from the dead, is very real. And yes, it was displayed on that first Easter long ago. But it's not limited to that time. And it is God's will that you should be able to experience that for yourself. That what Thomas experienced that second Sunday is and can be your experience. And I'm not suggesting, of course, that you will be able to experience it exactly as Thomas experienced it. I am not suggesting that I think that Jesus is going to come strolling in here any moment and he's going to invite you to put your fingers in his hands and your hand in his side. But I think it can happen. And it might be very personal. Might be an experience that you would find very hard to share with someone else, like the disciples found it hard to share with Thomas. And it might be brief, only a few seconds. And it might even be subtle, and if you're not really paying attention, you could possibly miss it, but I think it can and must happen. Because the promise is there right in the story. And the promise is in the pattern. Basically, it's this. When Thomas is there in church, he experiences directly the resurrection of Jesus. When he's not there, he misses it. And in that pattern is the promise for the church. It's saying that the church is and should be the place where it happens. So yes, by all means, go out in the world. Go out there and do what you can to live in relation to God, to love those who need loving, to stand up for injustice, to do what is right and good. Go out there, yes. You'll probably find that there's limits to what you can do all your own, and that it's better to work alongside others. And yes, it is true that the church is there to provide you those opportunities to work together with others. But by all means, go and do what you can. But all the good you do, all that you accomplish, will begin to lose its meaning and its purpose if you do not find some way in your life to continue that experience of the risen Jesus. And the church is provided for you as the place where that can happen. In fact, it's my job, together with others, to create conditions. You know, in our worship, in our prayer, in our praise, in the music, in the words, whatever. To create a circumstance where God can break through to you. It's my job. Sometimes I do it well, sometimes not so well, but it's my job. It's God's job to break through to you. Your job simply is this, to permit it to happen. To open up yourself to the possibility that it might happen. That's your job. It won't happen every time. Many times we will gather for worship and it won't happen for you, I know that. There'll be times when it doesn't happen for anyone. But as long as you keep open the possibility to yourself, as long as you open your heart with faith and some expectation, the promise is there. And at some moment, in a word, in a phrase of music, in a prayer, in something we do, in something in the face of your sister or brother around you, God will do something to break through to you and let you know that He